Today we're setting up a lead capture form in Dubsado. Our goal is to set up the lead capture so that you can share it on your website or on social media so that you can bring new leads into Dubsado. And as I mentioned, I'm not going to be going over so much about the strategy of using lead captures. I've included a link to Cameron's webinar, Defining Your Entry Points here. Definitely go check that out if you've not already. Also helps to be familiar with projects and clients and the difference between the two. All right, so we're just going to jump right back over into Dubsado and start setting this up here. So in Dubsado, whoops, is my screen a little bit big? Hold on one sec. Let me get this arranged a little better. There we go. All right, so in Dubsado, you're going to go to Templates and Forms. This is where you'll set up a lead capture form. All the way over on the right-hand side where it says lead capture, you'll click on that plus button and it will start a brand new form for you. So unlike some of the other forms, the other types of forms in Dubsado, when you create a brand new lead capture form, we do actually give you a starting point here with some elements that are already on the form. The first three here, the first name, last name, and email, are actually really important to have on your lead capture form. Your lead capture will not work correctly if you don't have these three questions and if they are not required and mapped correctly. Let me show you what that means. So if I click on this first name field, it pulls up the sort of side modal here where we can edit the question. So you can change the actual text that is shown as the question. So first name, we could change to, your first name. However you want to present this, you can change that text. The placeholder is just the information inside. You can remove it if you don't want any sort of hint for the client, or you can, fill that in differently. You'll notice there's a checkbox here that says required. So this is asking you, do you want to require the client to enter something into this field in order to submit the form? And for our first name, last name, and email for the client on a lead capture, we definitely want all three of those required. And finally, we have the maps too. So this is a setting that tells Dubsado where to save the information that the client enters into this question field. So we're saying, hey, whatever the client types in this box, we want it saved as the client's first name. So if I click on this, it's going to show you all of the options to where you can map the information in a question. This one, we want to go to the client's first name, since that is what we're asking up here at the top. So all three of these are required and they're each mapped to, this one is for the last name, so we're mapping it to the client's last name. This one is for the email. This one is especially important. You need a way to reach back out to the client. It's required. And we're mapping it to the client email address. So we definitely need one of each of these on our lead capture form. I have gotten the question, can we do just a whole, can you put in the full name? And I've seen that done before where someone will put in a short answer question and they'll say, just type in your full name. In Dubsado, that's not going to work very well because Dubsado saves the first name and the last name of the client in two different places. And that's what lets you address the client by just their first name. For example, if you're writing an email, you can put in, a little smart field that says client first name, and it will autofill with the client's first name. And that is, why that's important to do, so that the first and last are separate, so you can use them separately in the system. So that's number one on the lead capture form. You need these three short answer questions, all required and mapped to the client's first name, last name, and email. And actually, we could remove everything else and you would have a lead capture form that would work. So that's sort of the bare minimum for creating a lead capture form. That's our requirement. Then from there, once you have those first 3 required fields, you can go ahead and add any additional fields that you think you need, and you can map them if you think it's necessary. So we'll talk about that. But from a strategy perspective, what should I put on my lead capture form? You might already have a contact form on your website that you've been using. You could go ahead and recreate that here, just adding on, the different types of questions to, sort of replicate what you're asking on your existing contact form. That's a good starting point. Otherwise, if you are, kind of new to this, you maybe don't have a contact form you're starting with, or you want to change it up, our kind of rule of thumb is to just ask as much as you need to know upfront to start working with this client. So if you're in the event industry, asking when is the event is probably really important, because you need to check if you're going to be available on that client's preferred date or not. So using a date select field like we see here to ask when is your event is a really great thing to do. Maybe you want to make sure to collect the phone number because that's very important to your process. You could ask that. So these are examples of using the date select field, the short answer field. Short answer would be for that, shorter bit of text like contact information. Down here, we have just like a comments box for, can ask if the client has any more questions they want to ask up front or any other details they want to provide. I've seen, some wedding photographers do cute things like what's your love story and things like that. So you can get creative with the questions that you're asking, but you want to make sure that you don't go overboard and ask too much, because the more questions you put on the form, the more time it will take someone to fill it out, the less potential clients might fill it out. So you can kind of balance that. The more you put on this form, the more you're asking of someone up front. It might mean that your leads are more qualified. Someone really wants to work with you, so they'll go through and fill out all of these questions. But if you kind of have a full intake sheet, maybe just narrow it down to what you need to know to make sure you want to work with the client, make sure you're available, and then you can send those other questions later in a questionnaire. So just kind of pare it down to, what you need to get started with the client. And again, you have all these different types of questions available to you. The free response, like we see here, is more for those longer answers. And then you have your short answers. So I mentioned mapping as well. Some of that key information you want to collect upfront from the client. You may want to map it just like we've done first name, last name, email. Something like a phone number. This is client contact information. You may want to map that to the client's phone number so that, it's in their client profile. It's stored there. And you can see, these other options as well available to you. There are custom mapped fields you can create. So you can create in your settings a custom mapped field, for example, for the guest count for an event. So inside of your settings, up here at the top, that gear icon, if we go to custom mapped fields, you can actually create special fields to store information about your clients and about their projects in Dubsado. And the nice thing about these custom map fields is that you'll be able to, pull that information out somewhere else. So you could pull the guest count into a contract or something and say, kind of repeat the guest count with a smart field. Or you could, if you're a pet photographer, you could ask, what are your pets' names? And you could have that information mapped so that you can autofill it later. Anytime you're mapping information into the system, it makes it available for you to, display somewhere else, which is a really great thing. So under project, for example, I've created this custom mapped field for the guest count of an event, and it's just a short answer. We'll come back to these custom map fields with dates in a little bit, but that's just an example that you could do. see, let's get back to our lead capture. Well, hold on, we didn't save that. Here we go. So you can add a short answer field and you can map it. You don't have to map it. All of the information that gets saved onto a form like this, you can access later, and I'll show you where to do that. But you can, put as many questions on as needed there. Okay, let's talk about the project tracking element. This is another really cool thing that you can add to your forms besides just collecting this basic information from your client. So we have a special element here on the side that says project tracking, and you can add this to your form. And it's a way to ask clients how they found you. So you can see by default, it says, how did you hear about us? So if I click on this, we can set this up with our project sources. So Dubsado has something called project sources that are sort of like tags, but they allow you to keep track of where a client found you so that you can pull up a little bit of a report on how many clients you're getting from each of these areas, and you can customize these. So you can actually, let me save this time so we can come back to it. Under reporting and project sources, you can set up the sources for projects that are important to you. So if you're in the wedding industry, you're on the Knot and Wedding Wire, and you want to include that on a lead capture form, you can add a source, specifically for these different places that clients can find you. So you can kind of, set up these tags, customize them to where you focus your marketing efforts. And then back in your lead capture form, let's see, I keep losing my place of where we are setting something up here. One sec, we might just have to refresh the page. Oh, there it is, the new lead capture form. I have too many examples there. So back in the lead capture form with our project tracking element, you can click on this, and what you're doing is you have to add in the options for the client to select from. So if we use this drop down, I can choose the options that I want the client to pick from. So I'm just choosing from the sources that I have set up under reporting. So you don't have to include all of them. I mean, you might, for whatever reason, not want to do that. But you can, just pick the main ones that you want to share here. You can reorder them using these arrows, and you can choose to require it or not. But that's up to you. You might have another option that says, word of mouth or heard it from a friend, something like that. But once this has the options you want, you can close that, and this will just be a drop down. So the client just thinks that they're choosing one of those options, and then once the lead capture gets submitted, it's actually going to, kind of tag that project with that project source. And I'll show you what that looks like when we fill out our form later. So that's the project tracking element. Okay, the next step is deciding whether you want a workflow to start. So again, I'm not going to go too deep into the strategy of this. Cameron covered it in his webinar last week. But from a lead capture form, you have the choice of starting a workflow on the new projects that get created when anyone fills out this form. You have two choices for that. One is in the settings tab. So if you go to the settings tab, you'll see a default workflow option here. You can use this drop down to select the workflow that you want to start when this lead capture is filled out. So that would be if you want everyone filling out this lead capture form to get the same exact workflow. Or on the form itself, you can add a workflow element. So this can be added to the form, and when you click on this, you can configure it to start a different workflow. Let's see if I have some good examples saved in here. I might not. but you can basically select a different workflow to start for each option. So if you had a headshots service and you created a headshots workflow, you can go ahead and start that if the client chooses headshots from this dropdown, by selecting and pairing that up here. So this is a great thing to do if you want to sort of differentiate by service which workflow is going to start. And if you include a workflow dropdown or workflow element rather, I would recommend making this a required field. Otherwise, they could skip it and then you have no workflow starting. So that's up to you. If you are, brand new and you don't have workflows set up yet, or you're still kind of plotting that out, that is okay. You don't have to add a workflow to the lead capture form. You can still take advantage of the lead capture to get clients into Dubsado so you can start working with them manually, but you don't have to specify a workflow to start. You can absolutely leave that and add to it later. It doesn't have to be all done at once. Then we have a couple settings to go through in the settings tab. So these are some things to kind of help you personalize, the way this form gets filled out and information saved. So we already talked about the default workflow. The expiration date is not something that really applies to lead captures. So you can leave that just as no expiration. The lead capture options right here is where we're more focused. The thank you message, this will display to the client as soon as they click submit on the lead capture form. So this is just a short message that you can customize. It's not, going to show up with any like colors or links or things like that. It's not like rich text, but you can just write in a short message. Essentially what will happen is if you put this form on your website, as soon as the client submits it, the form will disappear and this message will appear in its place. So that's what this little message is. An alternative to the thank you message is a redirect URL. So you can actually put in a URL of like a specific page on your website. Maybe you set up a custom thank you page on your website that you want to direct clients back to. You can definitely put that URL in the redirect here. The one thing you do not want to do is to put in the URL of a Dubsado scheduler or another Dubsado form. You don't want to do that. That would be the incorrect way to pair a scheduler and a lead capture and can cause all sorts of problems for you. So only use the redirect URL if you're going to a site outside of Dubsado. But that is a great tool if you have something like that set up. The project status is where you can customize which status these new projects are being created under. So by default, if we leave this blank, new projects created by lead capture forms, if we go to the projects page, let's make sure to save. If we go back to the projects page here, any of those new projects being created by lead captures, they will end up in this leads all section right here. So they will just show up under leads all and they won't be otherwise categorized. You can see that I have other category or other statuses set up here under leads, including one for new inquiries. And these are all set up from the projects page under customize, where that button is right there. So you can add your own statuses. If you add your own statuses, then when you're customizing the lead capture form, you will be able to, in your settings, put in the specific project status you want new projects to go into. So I like doing this into new inquiries, for example. And the last one I'll talk about is the lead title. So this is a great way to customize the name of new projects being created. From the form tab here, you can adjust the name of the lead capture form. So this is how you'll see it in your templates, but if you leave it this way, this is also going to be the title of any new projects that get created. So you can customize that here with the lead title. You can actually use the client's name. So, you can kind of customize this here for what you want it to say. And you can use the client dropdown to pull in a smart field with the client's name, which is kind of cool. So you can have that information just already in the title of the project. I've seen ways of doing this where you might have just like a client first name, and if you're asking for an alternate contact in a short answer field on the form, this is really great for wedding industries where we're collecting the names of the couple. You could just have like a first name and the alternate contact, which would be the the partner's name, and you could call that their wedding. So that's a neat way of doing this. Lots of ways you can customize that title. As long as you are mapping this information on the form. So if we want to pull in an alternate contact's first name, then in the form tab here, I need a short answer question that says like your partner's first name. And we need to map it to the alternate contact first name. So this, again, just goes along into, you only need to map it if you want to use it again later, autofill it later. Okay, so that is pretty much the basics of just creating the form. Now, once it's created, you can go ahead and test it out by clicking the share button up here at the top and using this direct link. This allows you to just open the form in a new tab on your computer. So this is easy to just kind of open up and test out. You can also send this link out through social media. If you don't have a website set up for it yet, you can still take advantage of this. If you do have a website, here's your embed code right up here. This is the code that you would paste into your web builder to replace your existing contact form. So there's the direct link for us to open this up. We'll just copy that and paste it here. So this is what the form would look like. And we can go ahead and fill this out. And let me see. Something else in here. Again, we'll come back to the dates. I have a couple tips for you on dates, but you can fill this out like a client would. Notice if something's not required, I can just skip over it. So, definitely remember to mark that required box on anything that is important. I'm going to also put in a project source here, select one so you can see what that looks like. When I click send, this will submit the form, and here you can see our thank you message text. So if you customize that text, this is where you would see it. Otherwise, if we put in a redirect URL, it would have reloaded over to that page. All right, back in Dubsado, let's go over to our projects, and under new inquiries, since that's what we set in the settings, we should see, here we go. I did not save the, you can see how the alternate contact name is not filling in because I did not save my changes before filling out the form. I'm just trying to run through this quickly here. Sorry about that. But you can see how even though we told the lead capture, hey, put in the alternate contact name, if I didn't fill out that field on the form, it's not able to autofill it. So that's the importance of the mapping. But let's just open this up. So you'd have that project created. You can see where we have our guest count mapped in under custom map project fields. And you also have the referral source. So we can see that that's noted as Facebook. If I go under reporting and project breakdown, I'll be able to see after a number of inquiries come in, I just have one that is attributed to Facebook at the moment. But if you have a number of inquiries come in, you'll start to see this graph filling out and start to be able to see more projects by source, which is pretty neat. So it's a good thing to tag those if that information is important to you. One last thing I want to show you with this is inside the project where to see the information entered on the lead capture. So you do get an email from Dubsado notifying you when someone has filled out your lead capture form, and it should include most of the basic information that they filled out. But you may want to go back into that form and see it exactly as it was submitted. So you can do that by opening their project, going to the Forms tab here, and then right where it says View, you can click on that and see what was filled out. So you can see this exactly as the client entered all of the details. So sometimes I've heard people may want to print this out for whatever reason. You could click Open. There's going to be a print option there, or a Save as PDF option that you can then print. But otherwise, this is where you can see that information. So even if you didn't have everything mapped, like the comments or something like that, you can still come back to the form and read through everything they submitted by just clicking View on the lead capture right there. So that is kind of the basics. I mean, it's tough because everyone's lead capture form will be different. The questions that everyone will need to ask are different. So it really comes down to, what sort of information you are looking to collect at the start. Don't overcomplicate it. Start simple. If you find that you're always having to re-ask the same thing, maybe consider adding that to the form, but don't overthink it. Just, go with your gut on what information you need at the start. The last thing I want to cover, and this won't apply to everyone, but it will apply to anyone who uses dates in their work. So especially the wedding and event industries, we have a lot of folks from those industries using Dubsado. And it's also good to know, even if you're not in these industries, how the date select function works on the lead capture form. So number one, you can put a date select field onto the form. It lets the client choose a date. We can see that right there. When I click on this, it is the only other type of field that you can map. So we only can map the short answer questions or the date select fields. We can't map the free responses. We can't map checkboxes, yes or no, or the drop down. We can't map any of that information. So the only ones we can map are the short answer and the date. By default, you can map the date into one of three places. We have project date, project start date, project end date. If you map a date field into one of these project date locations, one of these three right here, it is going to create an event on your calendar. There's not a way of stopping that, and it could impact your scheduling availability as well. So you do want to be mindful of this, that if you have this mapped on your lead capture, events are going to be created on your calendar. You might like that, you might not. So it's good to be aware of. The project date itself, if you just have it mapping to the project date, the client will just be choosing, let's see if we can save this again, and I'll bring it up one more time here. The client is choosing a single date, and a single date will be assigned as the project date. And we use this date a lot in, not only is it an event on your calendar, but it's also used to automate certain workflow actions if you're using those. And it's also used to automate payment reminders. You can base payment scheduled due dates and reminders off of a project date. So it has, some significance in the system. So a single project date would just be one date for the project, no date range. It acts as the start and the end. It's just one date, very simple. The other option that you have is to change this to a project start or project end. And as you do that, you'll notice there's now a time field. So if I save that and refresh the page here, anytime you save changes, they're live instantly when you refresh. So here we are. You can select a date and a time. right here. So when you do that, this allows you to let the client set a range of the event. So, you could have this be kind of 2 different dates, or it'll be the same date but 2 different times. Either way, though, you don't want to map a date field to the project start date without also mapping another date select field to the project end date. If you do one, you have to do the other. If you don't, Dubsado can run into some errors with the project only having a start and no end, or an end and no start. That can be a little tricky on the calendar. So if you do need a precise range from the client, maybe you need them to specify a start and end time of their event for whatever reason, use 2 date select fields and map both. Unfortunately, if it is going to be all on the same day, they'll just need to reconfirm the date as they put in the time. So if it's September 9th from 9 a.m. until, you can also type this in, 12 p.m., they just have to enter that both times. And then that'll be, the kind of event that gets added to your calendar and also saved as the project date. Those times will come into play there. So one last trick for you with these project dates, if you do not like the idea of an event going straight onto your calendar just when someone's filling out a lead capture form, you can still collect a date. You can do it the really simple way is to just do it without mapping. So once you map something, you do have to delete the field and restart entirely. So you can just hover over and click the trash can icon to delete that field. And then add a date select back here. So you could leave this without mapping and just, go back and look at the form like we did inside of the project and see what their date was. You can also use a custom mapped field to help you get around this. So in your settings, you can go ahead and under custom mapped fields for the project, don't tie it to the client. It's more appropriate to the project. You can click create, and we could say something like requested date and map and say that that's going to be a date type of information. Save that. Now we have this custom field to store a date. And inside of our lead capture here I go, not saving things again. Shame on me. But now we can map this to that requested date custom mapped project field. So instead of mapping it to the project date, which has that additional functionality of putting the event on the calendar and being active in the workflow and things like that, now we're just using a custom mapped field for the date just to save it. And I'll show you again where this shows up. If we quickly fill this out again. And we'll put in our date. Remember, we mapped this as the requested date, not as the project date. So we'll choose something there. I'll just leave the rest of that blank. Okay, now if we go back to our projects page and open this up, let's see, I think it should be this one. Notice we don't have a date here. We didn't map the project date, so it doesn't have one set up here at the top, but under custom map project fields, we can easily see the date showing up right here. So this is a good workaround if you don't want these new leads going on your calendar right away. Collect the date in a custom mapped project field and just hang on to it. You'll know the date in the sidebar. And then after you confirm that the client is booking with you and you're ready for this to go on your calendar, then you can manually come in and click set date and go ahead and put in the date as you want it here. So that's a really good workaround for those of you who don't want this on the calendar using that. One thing to note is that this custom mapped fields for dates, it's just for information only. You can autofill this into an email with a smart field. So if I do send email, we could say smart field under project requested date, and we could have that fill in. And you could fill that in on any email template or form template. But these dates cannot be used for automation, and they won't go on your calendar. So it's more for informational purposes only. And that is it on, kind of the tips and tricks for setting up the lead capture form.